Ethan Cole, 18 years old, walked into the Franklin County courtroom with a terrifying arrogance, smiling defiantly at the family of the girl he had brutally murdered, Madison Clark. Believing that his youth would be a shield protecting him from all sins, he treated the trial like a stage and Madison's death as just a minor detail in the story he had written himself. But what silenced the entire courtroom did not come from the evidence or the accusations, but from his own chillingly cold attitude when he talked about the crime as if it were just a normal act. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On the evening of February 14, 2009, darkness fell over the quiet suburban streets of Columbus, Ohio, bringing with it the hard chill of a Midwestern winter. Thin snowflakes drifted lazily over the frozen roads, glistening under the cold light of endless street lamps. Each house was a small fortress of warmth and daily routine, where families gathered around the dinner table, candlelight and laughter ringing out to fend off the encroaching night. In the modest single-story home on Brookstone Drive, 17-year-old Madison Clark was preparing for a peaceful evening. The scent of baked goods and roses still lingered in the air. She was the only daughter of a middle-class family, a senior high school student with a gentle personality and outstanding academic performance, someone always loved by friends and trusted by teachers. She enjoyed reading books, listening to classical music, and spending weekends volunteering at the local library. Her life was a testament to stability and kindness, a familiar model in the quiet neighborhoods of Columbus, where people believed violence only existed on the evening news. That Valentine's night, Madison was home alone. Her parents had gone to a party with friends, leaving their usual reminders and goodnight wishes over the phone. None of them could have imagined that, just a few hours later, that small house would become the epicenter of a tragedy that shook the entire city. The neighborhood's peace was just an illusion, a thin shell hiding something quietly cracking beneath. Madison had lived in this house for all 17 years of her life, her days a chain of simple, serene moments surrounded by those who loved her. That night, there was only the distant noise of traffic on the boulevard and the wind sweeping through the bare trees, a quiet symphony that gave no warning of the violence to come. The attack was not a failed robbery or a burst of rage. It was the intrusion of pure malice, without reason, without explanation. An event so cruel that investigators later had to search for a motive that did not exist. The first official record of the tragedy was logged at 10:47 p.m. when the 911 dispatch received a short, anonymous call reporting strange noises and flickering lights from the Clark family home. The operator only heard a few panicked words before the line went dead. A terrifying silence enveloped everything, prompting 2 patrol cars to be dispatched to the scene immediately. When the 2 patrol cars arrived on Brookstone Drive, the dashboard clock showed 10:54 p.m. Red and blue lights reflected off the thin snow, sweeping over the skeletal trees and silent houses. The front door of number 412 was ajar, with no signs of forced entry. Inside, the living room light was still on, the TV screen flickering from an unfinished movie. On the floor near the sofa, Madison Clark lay motionless, a small streak of blood soaking into the light-colored carpet. The first officers on the scene confirmed she was deceased, with the initial cause determined to be a close-range gunshot wound. There were no signs of struggle or fight. The surrounding items were almost intact. On the dining table, there was still a glass of water and a plate of untouched pastries, indicating everything happened suddenly and in silence. Police quickly sealed off the area, setting up yellow tape around the front yard, and contacted the criminal investigation team. They checked the windows and back door, all locked, with no pry marks or signs of external entry. Madison's wallet, phone, and laptop were all still in place, ruling out the possibility of theft. On the coat rack near the door hung the jacket she usually wore when going out, a small detail but one that showed Madison had no intention of leaving the house at that time. The preliminary on-scene report concluded the murder was most likely committed by someone known to the victim. News spread quickly within the police department, and within an hour, a special investigation team was mobilized. They began collecting fingerprints, analyzing shoe prints, and extracting data from neighborhood security cameras. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Madison's parents received a call in the early morning hours. When they arrived, they were stopped outside by the police barricade. Mrs. Linda Clark, her mother, collapsed upon hearing the officer in charge confirm the news. Thomas Clark, Madison's father, stood silently, his hands gripping the barricade tape tightly, his eyes vacant as he stared at the still-lit house, where just a few hours earlier his daughter had texted good night. No one could say a word. A social worker was called to provide support, but could do nothing but silently share their pain. News of the case broke the next morning. Local TV stations opened their broadcasts with bold headlines. 17-year-old female student murdered in her own home. The press continuously updated information, online pages flooded with images of Madison in her school uniform, her gentle smile making the sorrow even deeper. Friends and teachers at Northland High School held a small memorial on Sunday. Hundreds of students brought flowers, candles, and handwritten cards placed in front of her house. They couldn't understand why a girl like Madison, hard-working, kind, and never in conflict with anyone, had been killed in her own home. The school suspended all extracurricular activities. Teachers tried to stay calm in front of students, but many couldn't hold back tears. At the community level, the case caused deep fear. Columbus was considered one of the safest cities in Ohio, where murders were rare, especially in middle-class neighborhoods. Residents in the area began locking doors more carefully. Some installed additional security systems, and every evening, neighbor groups gathered to discuss what had happened. Parents warned children not to go out after dark, while the elderly avoided mentioning Madison's name to avoid scaring the grandchildren. Meanwhile, reporters and TV vans camped out all day in front of number 412, making the once quiet scene even heavier. On the second day after the crime, the Columbus Police Department held a short press conference. Lieutenant Alan Brooks, in charge of the investigation, spoke to the cameras. No signs of forced entry, no evidence suggesting this was a random act. We believe the victim knew the perpetrator. He pledged to mobilize all resources to find the person responsible for the murder. That statement was replayed continuously on evening news, becoming the talk of the entire city. In the following days, Columbus was no longer the place of peace it once was. Everyone carried the same unanswered question: who could have done this, and why? As the third night fell, Brookstone Drive was still lit under the patrol car floodlights, and inside the police station, the investigation team began focusing on the only remaining lead, those who had known Madison Clark. On the morning of the third day after the crime, the area around the Clark family home remained sealed off. Inside, Columbus Police Department investigators continued working in silence, collecting even the smallest samples. The preliminary forensic report confirmed that the fatal bullet to Madison was fired from under 1 meter, piercing her right temple and lodging in the wall behind her. No foreign fingerprints were found on the gun, but technicians discovered light gunshot residue on the victim's sleeve, indicating she was very close when the shot was fired. Police also recovered a single shell casing at the scene, a common 9mm round, typically used in semi-automatic handguns. The crime scene and forensic results ruled out suicide or a struggle, reinforcing the hypothesis of premeditated murder. Concurrently, the digital team began retrieving data from Madison's phone and laptop. In the phone, they discovered a message chain between Madison and her school boyfriend, Ethan Cole, spanning the 3 days prior to the crime. The conversations revealed a deteriorating relationship, with many tense and insulting exchanges. In a message sent on the evening of February 13th, Madison wrote, "We need to stop, this is getting worse." The final message was sent at 10:31 p.m. on February 14th, about 15 minutes before the murder occurred. It was brief. "Don't come here anymore, Ethan. I'll call the police." The investigation immediately shifted focus to this 18-year-old. Cell carrier location data confirmed Ethan Cole's phone was in the Brookstone Drive area from 10:25 to 10:45 p.m., matching the time frame of the gunshot. When cross-referenced with Ethan's initial statement, claiming he was home all evening, investigators noted a clear contradiction. Police continued searching for physical evidence linking Ethan to the scene. From security camera footage of the house across the street, they spotted a figure in a dark jacket and hooded cap walking along Brookstone Drive around 10:34 p.m. heading toward Madison's home. The image was blurry, but the gait and height roughly matched Ethan Cole's description. The investigation team sent the footage to the digital analysis lab to enhance clarity and verify details. At the same time, the ballistics unit issued a preliminary report. The bullet recovered from the wall had rifling marks matching test rounds fired from a Glock 9mm, registered to Mr. Richard Cole, Ethan's father. When police verified the registration, they learned the gun was usually kept in a family safe, but on the morning of February 15th, Richard had reported to the Firearms Authority that he was not sure where the gun was after hearing about the crime. He stated Ethan was the only one who could know the safe's code. Subsequent ballistics and rifling analysis confirmed the fatal bullet was fired from a gun of the same model and production year as the Cole family's weapon. These pieces of evidence were compiled into the official investigation file. Police also conducted numerous interviews at the school. Madison's friends described her relationship with Ethan as increasingly strained in recent weeks. One classmate said they heard Madison say she was afraid of Ethan's unpredictable anger. A homeroom teacher confirmed Ethan had been disciplined for verbal aggression and once shoved a classmate. Many described Ethan as intelligent, but prone to losing control, attention-seeking, and manipulative. Neighbors of the Cole family said that on the night of the crime, they heard a car door slam hard around nearly 11 p.m., but thought it was just a normal nighttime sound. These statements, combined with digital data, formed a consistent timeline showing Ethan left home around 10:15 p.m., drove to Brookstone Drive, and returned near 11 p.m. Each piece was connected in the comprehensive report. The preliminary investigation concluded the crime had no random element. The perpetrator knew the victim, and the act was intentional. The Columbus police officially identified Ethan Cole as the prime suspect in Madison Clark's murder. A search warrant for the Cole home was issued that night, and the case file was transferred to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office to prepare for the next phase of the investigation. On the morning of February 16, 2009, as the sun rose behind the frost-covered roofs of the Eastmore neighborhood, the Columbus Police Department's tactical team was positioned outside the Cole family's two-story home. The arrest warrant was signed overnight after investigators gathered sufficient charging evidence. At 6:12 a.m., police surrounded the area, with 2 patrol cars blocking both ends of the street and a team approaching the front door. When they knocked and identified themselves, Ethan Cole answered. The 18-year-old appeared in a gray sweater, disheveled hair, still holding a coffee mug. Ethan showed no surprise or fear. When the officer read the arrest warrant, he merely raised an eyebrow and calmly said, "I understand." Without resistance or questions, Ethan extended both hands as police cuffed him. His parents, Richard and Susan Cole, stood frozen at the top of the stairs, utterly bewildered. They had no idea what was happening, only watching their son being led away without explanation. Ethan left in silence, glancing back at his parents once, expressionless. By 6:45 a.m., he was transported to the Central Police Station and handed over to the Major Crimes Unit. Interrogation began immediately. Led by 2 experienced investigators, Lieutenant Alan Brooks and Detective Julia Reed. The interrogation room was monitored by camera, with Ethan seated across the table, maintaining composure. When asked about the night of February 14th, he said briefly, "I was home, didn't go anywhere." Brooks placed copies of the location data and security footage in front of him, pointing out the exact times Ethan's phone appeared near Madison's house. He glanced at them and replied, "My phone could have fallen somewhere. Someone probably took it." His tone was calm, unflinching. When police mentioned the message chain, Ethan smiled faintly. "She was mad at me." Normal teenage stuff. His indifference made the investigators suspect he was trying to control the situation. For nearly the first hour, He evaded questions and denied leaving home on the night of the murder. Only when Detective Reed presented the firearms inventory report, proving his father's Glock 9mm was used, did Ethan falter. He looked down at the table, silent for a few seconds, then admitted, "I borrowed Dad's gun, just to shoot targets, didn't mean to hurt anyone." From there, Ethan's statement began to shift. He admitted driving to Brookstone Drive around 10:30 p.m. just to talk to Madison, insisting there was no argument and she was fine when he left. However, the details he provided contradicted forensic results. Police cross-referenced phone data, determining he left the scene just minutes after the gunshot. When asked why he didn't call police, Ethan simply said, "I didn't think it was my business." Brooks looked up and asked directly, "Do you understand she's dead?" Ethan was silent, then replied in a low but clear voice, "If that's true, it doesn't change anything." The response stunned both investigators. No fear, no remorse, just cold emptiness. In the recording, Ethan frequently avoided eye contact, occasionally leaned back in his chair, sighed, or tapped his fingers on the table, as if impatient. When asked about the bullet, he said, "I don't know," despite ballistics clearly proving it came from the family gun. The investigators noted his logic gradually unraveling, with contradictions between responses. At times, Ethan claimed he only stood outside the door. At others, he said he entered the living room to get back a gift he'd given. Meanwhile, every detail at the scene proved the victim had no time to react, with the shot fired at too close a range to be accidental. The interrogation lasted over 4 hours. Toward the end, Ethan showed clear fatigue, but no anxiety. When asked, "Do you regret it?" he shrugged. Would regret bring her back? The statement was recorded verbatim in the transcript, becoming the clearest evidence of the suspect's callousness. By 11:30 a.m., after his rights were reread and he signed the statement, Ethan remained calm and asked, "So can I go home now?" The question left Detective Reed speechless, while Lieutenant Brooks stared and said, "No, you're not going anywhere." The interrogation file was finalized that afternoon. Physical evidence, ballistics, phone data, visual traces, along with Ethan's contradictory statements and demeanor, were forwarded to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office. By day's end, Prosecutor Olivia Bennett signed the indictment, charging Ethan Cole with first-degree murder under Ohio Revised Code Section 2903.01. With the evidence in hand, the initial investigation phase closed, opening a case the entire city of Columbus would never forget. After the indictment was signed on the afternoon of February 16, 2009, the Madison Clark case file was transferred to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office. All evidence collected from the scene, forensic reports, and police interrogation transcripts were handed over to prepare for prosecution. The lead prosecutor was Assistant District Attorney Olivia Bennett. With over 10 years of experience handling murders with complex psychological elements, Bennett quickly formed a dedicated prosecution team, including 2 legal specialists, a ballistics expert, and a forensic psychologist, to analyze the defendant's behavior. In the first meeting, she ordered a full review of the file to ensure absolute airtightness. The specialized teams worked for days in the prosecutor's office, organizing evidence into specific categories. The first section was the message chain between Madison and Ethan, printed and time-stamped, clearly showing escalating conflict from personal arguments and threats to Madison's final warning on the night of the murder. The second section was digital evidence, including location data, call logs, and security footage. This proved Ethan's phone was in the Brookstone Drive area during the exact time frame of Madison's death. The third section was physical evidence, fingerprints matching Ethan on the living room doorknob, his DNA on a water glass near the body, and ballistics confirming the bullet was fired from his father's Glock. The fourth section was witness statements. Police gathered consistent accounts from friends and teachers. Ethan had a volatile temper, had lashed out and broken objects when rejected or criticized. One classmate clearly recalled seeing Ethan argue intensely with Madison on school grounds 2 days before the crime. Witnesses described him as intelligent but unpredictable, often dismissive of others and attention-seeking through extreme behavior. After compilation, the prosecution team determined there was not only sufficient evidence to charge, but also to prove premeditation and full awareness of consequences. Olivia Bennett also requested the forensic psychology unit to produce a criminal behavior evaluation. Records showed Ethan had been disciplined twice in high school for violent conduct, one for fighting a classmate, another for threatening a teacher. The psychological evaluation identified clear traits of antisocial personality disorder, lack of empathy, grandiosity, and manipulative tendencies. The report concluded Ethan was fully capable of understanding his actions at the time of the crime, rejecting any argument of temporary loss of control. With this data, ADA Bennett decided to prosecute Ethan Cole as an adult for first-degree murder, premeditated and with awareness. The decision was submitted to Franklin County Court for approval and to formally open the case. News of the indictment spread the same day. Major Ohio newspapers like the Columbus Dispatch and Cleveland Plain Dealer ran stories on the Valentine's Day murder, the media's name for the shocking case. Public opinion was divided. Some believed Ethan was just a wayward teen needing psychological treatment rather than life in prison. Others were outraged, seeing it as proof of a generation's moral decay without limits. Local TV hosted panels on juvenile violence and motiveless crime, questioning whether society had ignored early warning signs. Schools around Columbus were required to hold student talks on personal safety and emotional control. Outside the prosecutor's office, reporters camped daily for updates. Every detail of Ethan's life and personality was exhaustively covered by media. He had excelled in science class, played guitar, but also posted defiant cold social media statuses. For Olivia Bennett, this case was not just a criminal file but a test of the justice system against crime born of apathy. After 6 weeks of preparation, all documents were finalized, witnesses were subpoenaed, and the trial was officially scheduled for October 5, 2009, at the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas. The city of Columbus, after months steeped in unease, now watched the case as a symbol of the clash between justice and cold indifference, two opposing forces about to enter the same courtroom. On the morning of October 5, 2009, the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas was packed with people. Outside the courthouse, dozens of reporters, television vans, and crowds of residents gathered early, awaiting the official start of the case dubbed the Valentine murder. Security was tightened, with everyone entering or exiting thoroughly checked. Inside the courtroom, cold white light evenly illuminated the solemn space, where rows of wooden benches were neatly arranged, clearly separating the prosecution, defense, and public gallery. In the front row, Madison Clark's parents sat silently, hands clasped tightly. Her mother bowed her head, eyes red from months of sleepless nights, while her father stared straight at the judge's bench, expressionless but with slightly trembling hands. On the opposite side, Richard and Susan Cole, the defendant's parents, sat quietly, faces weary, avoiding the crowd's gaze. Up front, the lead prosecutor, ADA Olivia Bennett, prepared a thick stack of documents and evidence. Beside her was a support team including 2 legal assistants and a digital expert. At the defense table, public defender Michael Crane organized papers, occasionally leaning in to whisper with Ethan Cole. When Ethan was led into the courtroom, all murmurs immediately ceased. The 18-year-old wore a gray suit, hair neatly cut, face calm to the point of chilling. He scanned the room, pausing briefly on the victim's family before looking away. No fear, no sign of remorse, just indifference, as if the proceedings had nothing to do with him. When Judge Robert Hayes entered and declared the trial open, Ethan sat still, hands clasped on the table, eyes forward, a faint, inscrutable smile flickering. After initial formalities, jury selection began. 24 citizens were called and subjected to questions from both sides. Prosecutor Bennett focused on ensuring selected jurors could remain objective about the brutal murder without being swayed by the defendant's age. Defense attorney Crane sought those capable of empathizing with juvenile psychological factors. After nearly a full day, 12 official jurors were confirmed, 6 men and 6 women, aged 30 to 50. Once everyone settled, Judge Hayes announced the start of opening statements. Representing the prosecution, Ada Bennett stood, voice calm but resolute. She began with a sentence that silenced the room. This was not an impulsive act, but a deliberate one without human motive. She briefly outlined the case, a clear-minded, intelligent 18-year-old who planned to meet the victim, brought a gun, and shot her at close range. She emphasized that the crime could not be explained by anger, intoxication, or loss of control, but was the result of a cold decision where the victim had no choice or chance to escape. The prosecution recapped the timeline: Madison's warning texts, Ethan's phone location data, neighborhood camera footage, ballistics matching the Cole family gun. Each element pointed to one conclusion: Ethan knew exactly what he was doing. Bennett concluded by stating the trial's goal was not just to determine guilt, but to clarify motive, calculation, and the defendant's awareness. We face a crime with no justification, where evil stems not from anger, but from emptiness, she said before returning to her seat. The courtroom fell silent for seconds. Attorney Crane stood next to present the defense's opening. His voice was low, striving for calm. He acknowledged the victim's family's immense loss, but urged the jury not to see a monster in a boy who just turned 18. He stressed Ethan had no prior record, was a capable student, and a young man struggling with loneliness and academic pressure. According to him, the crime resulted from a moment of lost control in emotional turmoil. Crane asked the court to consider family circumstances, psychological history, and the defendant's youthful immaturity. Throughout, Ethan sat motionless, expressionless. He neither looked at the prosecution nor Madison's family. When the attorney mentioned remorse, Ethan turned slightly, smiling faintly, a fleeting expression that chilled the room. The prosecution noted the reaction, and Judge Hayes looked up, closely observing the gesture. By late morning, after both openings, the judge recessed to prepare for evidence presentation. As people left, no one spoke. Outside, media immediately reported on the defendant's cold smile on opening day, making Ethan Cole the focus across Ohio. Inside, hundreds of pages of files were ready to be opened, beginning the journey to understand what turned an 18-year-old into the taker of the life of someone he once claimed to love. On the second day of the trial, the courtroom atmosphere grew tenser as the prosecution began presenting evidence. ADA Olivia Bennett stepped to the center, holding a thick file and a small remote for projections. She opened by reiterating the case's core. An 18-year-old brought a gun to his girlfriend's house on Valentine's night. He was not threatened, not provoked, not under any pressure. He arrived with one intent: to assert power by taking another's life. The large screen behind her displayed the first image, a police crime scene diagram. It showed Madison Clark's body position, distance to the door, and the shell casing found less than a meter from her. Next, Bennett presented physical evidence: Ethan's fingerprints on the living room doorknob, DNA on a water glass beside the victim, and the 9mm bullet perfectly matching the Glock owned by the defendant's father. All forensic results were verified by independent Ohio State experts, with no errors in collection or analysis. Each detail was read slowly and clearly, like hammer blows to the defense's fragile hopes. After physical evidence, the prosecution moved to digital proof. Security camera footage from a nearby house was shown at 10:34 p.m. A figure in a dark jacket appeared, walking straight and quickly toward Madison's home. Though the face was unclear, height and build matched Ethan Cole. Immediately after, phone location data was projected, a map showing Ethan's device leaving Eastmore at 10:15 p.m., stopping near Brookstone Drive for 18 minutes, then returning home at 10:55 p.m. This timeline precisely matched the victim's time of death and the neighbor's 911 call. As the timeline chart appeared, Bennett paused, looked at the jury and said, "There is no coincidence here. This was a purposeful journey." She continued with the final message chain from Madison's phone. Madison's last text at 10:31 p.m. "Don't come here anymore, Ethan. I'll call the police." 6 minutes later, Ethan's phone signal appeared in Brookstone Drive. 4 minutes after that, the only sound in the neighborhood was a gunshot. Bennett stated firmly, "That is enough time for someone to drive over, enter the house, fire and leave." Coldly, without hesitation, concluding the evidence reconstruction, she analyzed the crime's nature. It was not impulsive. Ethan brought a gun, chose a late hour when Madison was alone, showing clear preparation. No signs of argument or struggle meant the victim had no time to defend herself. Shot at close range, the killer approached deliberately. No apology was spoken, no attempt to call for help, only silence. A calculated act to chilling perfection. She lowered her voice. This was not a crime of passion, it was a crime of control. The prosecution called forensic psychologist Dr. Harold Stein as an expert witness. He presented Ethan's psychological evaluation, concluding antisocial personality traits, lack of empathy, power obsession, disregard for others' feelings. Ethan did not kill Madison out of love, but because he could not accept losing control of the relationship. To him, Madison was not a person but property. The statement silenced the room. EDA Bennett continued with evidence of post-crime indifference. She played interrogation video excerpts recorded right after Ethan's arrest. In the clip, Ethan leaned back, answering slowly, emotionless. When asked, "Do you regret it?" he replied, "Would regret bring her back?" A wave of murmurs swept the room. Some in the gallery turned away. Madison's father bowed his head. Her mother cried silently. The jury was instructed to note the response in personal notebooks. When the video ended, Bennett looked directly at the defendant. This moment shows a clear, active mind. No panic of someone who made a mistake. Only the indifference of one who believes he will never be punished. She walked slowly to the podium, voice calm but firm. Every element of premeditated crime is here: plan, weapon, timing, and post-act attitude. Ethan Cole acted not out of anger, not panic, but to assert power. He wanted to prove he could decide who lives and who dies, and he did so with full awareness. She paused, closed the file, and concluded, "This case is not an accident, it is a choice. The choice of a clear, cold, and callous mind." As ADA Bennett returned to her seat, the courtroom remained silent. On the defendant's bench, Ethan Cole leaned back, hands clasped, eyes vacant, but lips slightly upturned, as if he had just heard a story unrelated to himself. As the trial moved to the defense phase, the courtroom atmosphere seemed to shift. Public Defender Michael Crane, appointed to represent the defendant, stood. A man in his 50s with experience in major criminal cases, known for calm and patience. Before him was a much thinner file than the prosecution's massive stack. Stepping to the center, Crane looked at the jury, voice low and measured, balancing reason and emotion. He began by acknowledging the case's gravity and the victim's family's pain, but stressed the defense's goal was not to deny loss, but to better understand the person behind the act. According to Crane, Ethan Cole was not a cold-blooded killer, but a young man just entering adulthood, immature enough to fail controlling emotions and actions under stress. He cited an independent expert psychological report showing Ethan had signs of emotional adjustment disorder and poor impulse control. At 18, he said, "The human brain is not fully developed in the region responsible for behavior control. A wrong decision in seconds can define a lifetime." Next, Crane presented environmental factors contributing to Ethan's deviant behavior. He described a disconnected family, a strict, distant father who rarely spoke to his son, and a mother busy with work, seldom home. Ethan grew up materially comfortable but emotionally neglected. Add academic pressure and excessive expectations. Per teacher and friend statements, Ethan was a high achiever but self-imposed perfectionism, prone to frustration when failing. Crane emphasized these factors, plus a crumbling romantic relationship, may have pushed him into psychological instability on the night of the crime. His central defense argument, Ethan suffered temporary diminished capacity, acting in a brief emotional crisis, not the clear-minded state the prosecution described. To support this, he quoted a psychologist's report stating, "Ethan may experience sudden loss of control episodes, common in impulsive personality structures." However, as Crane tried to paint a picture of a vulnerable, unstable young man, the defendant himself undermined the effort. Throughout the defense, Ethan sat slouched, gaze distant, occasionally sighing or smiling faintly when his circumstances were mentioned. When Crane said Ethan is a young man needing help, not a soulless monster, he shrugged, looked down, then toward the prosecution. His indifference sparked whispers in the room. The jury observed every gesture. None saw remorse. As Crane stressed Ethan's act resulted from immediate emotional disorder, the defendant suddenly looked up, stared at the bench, and said softly but audibly into the microphone, "I'm not disordered at all." The statement silenced the room. Crane paused for seconds, then continued as if unheard, but his face showed clear disappointment. Ethan's interruption nearly invalidated the temporary diminished capacity argument. As the defense concluded, Crane shifted to humanitarian grounds. He pleaded the court consider the defendant's youth and human capacity for rehabilitation. He said, "We cannot restore the life lost, but we can prevent destroying another." The closing, though sincere, could not erase Ethan's impression. As Crane returned to his seat, Ethan merely nodded, lips still faintly smiling. The courtroom reaction was nearly unanimous. The jury exchanged puzzled glances. The public shook heads. Madison's family sat motionless. The contradiction between the defense's words and the defendant's actual behavior was stark. All efforts to evoke sympathy dissolved before the coldness in the 18-year-old's eyes. By session's end, as the judge recessed, discussions erupted throughout the room. The defense had finished, but no one believed it could alter the conclusion forming in the minds of those who would decide Ethan Cole's fate. On the third day of the trial, the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas courtroom was nearly full to capacity. The public gallery was packed with reporters, residents, and students from Madison School. Witness testimony began at 9 a.m. ADA. Olivia Bennett started by introducing the first witness, Sarah Kim, a classmate of Ethan and Madison. Sarah was a petite girl with brown hair, her voice trembling as she stepped to the stand. She said that in their senior year, Ethan stood out, smart, high grades, but always distant from friends. He wasn't close to anyone, almost never smiled, Sarah said. She recalled one time, during a criminology discussion in sociology class, Ethan said, "People kill each other out of curiosity, more than hatred." The class laughed, thinking it was a joke, but the look in his eyes when he said it gave Sarah chills. When asked about Ethan and Madison's relationship, she replied that they were close at first. But in the weeks before Madison's death, Madison started avoiding him. She said, "Ethan got angry over little things and once gripped her arm so hard it left bruises." Sarah bowed her head, silent for seconds before saying, "I think she was afraid of him." The next witness was Mr. Robert Atkins, the physics teacher who taught Ethan for 2 years. He described Ethan as an outstanding student, but with extreme personality traits. He liked to argue, always wanted to prove others wrong, even teachers. Atkins said, he recounted an incident months earlier when Ethan argued with a classmate about an experiment, then suddenly slammed his hand on the desk, silencing the class. No one understood why he reacted that way. Afterward, he just looked at me and said, "Sometimes people need noise to focus." When asked about Ethan's emotional expressions, he replied, "None. Everything seemed like a concept to him, without attached feelings." Atkins' testimony had the jury taking diligent notes, while Ethan sat upright, eyes on the table, no reaction. The third witness was Mrs. Karen Lopez, a neighbor of the Cole family. She said, Ethan was a quiet boy, often in the backyard shooting targets with an air gun or throwing knives. He had a habit of standing still for hours, just staring at the target. I thought it was focus, but now I'm not sure. She said on the night of February 14th, she heard a car door slam hard, then a small sound like metal clinking, but thought it was the wind. When police asked, she learned the truth. "I still can't believe it," she said, voice choking. "The boy I watched grow up could do that." After the first 3 testimonies, the courtroom fell silent. ADA Bennett continued by calling Lieutenant Alan Brooks, who directly arrested Ethan. He took the stand, posture straight, voice clear and decisive. He described the morning of February 16th, the arrest warrant execution. "When we knocked," Ethan answered. He showed no fear or surprise. "When I read the warrant, he just said, 'I understand.'" Brooks said during transport, Ethan stayed silent. No questions, no reactions. He added, "I've arrested many murder suspects, but never one so calm." In describing the interrogation, Lieutenant Brooks confirmed Ethan admitted being at the scene, but showed no remorse. When I asked if he thought about the victim, he said, "What good would thinking do?" A few in the gallery cried upon hearing that. The jury was silent, many looking down at notebooks, faces tense. After witnesses on Ethan's character and behavior finished, the prosecution called the day's final witness, Mrs. Linda Clark, Madison's mother. The room went dead quiet as she took the stand, holding a photo of her daughter. Her voice trembled, recounting Madison. She was a child who always brought joy to others. She never knew how to say harsh words to anyone. She described the fateful night, receiving the police call. "I asked them if they had the wrong house. I couldn't believe it. Every morning, I still look into her room, hoping she'll walk out like before." When the prosecution asked about psychological impact, she fought tears. "No words describe losing your only child. Our home has no laughter, only silence. I can't pass her door without stopping." The jury bowed heads, a few wiped eyes. Mrs. Clark turned to the defendant. "I'm not here for an apology, because I know there won't be one. I just want him to understand. Madison was a person, not something for him to own." Ethan looked at her for seconds, then turned away, face indifferent. The coldness in that reaction made many in the room shudder. As she left the stand, the entire gallery stood silently in respect. Late afternoon, Judge Hayes allowed the prosecution to summarize testimonies. ADA Bennett recapped, "Witnesses described an intelligent but emotionless person, someone who doesn't know the line between love and control, who acted with terrifying coldness." She thanked the jury and requested all testimonies be entered into the record. When the gavel sounded ending the day, no one spoke. Madison's family left in friends' arms, while Ethan sat a few seconds longer, eyes vacant, then stood to follow officers out. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy, the pain on one side and emptiness on the other, creating a stark contrast, proof of the unbridgeable gap between victim and the one who took her life. On the 4th day of the trial, the courtroom atmosphere was particularly heavy. After days of witnesses and prosecution presentations, Judge Robert Hayes announced the defendant would have the right to speak. All eyes turned to Ethan Cole as he was invited to stand. Stepping from his seat, Ethan adjusted his suit jacket, walked to the stand calmly. No hesitation, no fear. He stood straight, hands clasped, voice clear, unshaking. "I understand I have the right to speak, and I'll be brief." Silence enveloped the room. Ethan began with a statement that nearly froze the courtroom. "I don't deny what happened, but I also don't think I need to regret it. I did what I wanted to do. No one forced me. No one controlled me. That was my free will." The jury looked at each other, some frowning, while Prosecutor Bennett looked up, noting every word. Ethan continued, voice even like presenting an argument. "Everyone says I lost control, that I acted impulsively. But I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew the consequences, and I didn't care. Everyone has their own choices, and that was mine." He paused, eyes straight at the jury, then to the prosecution. "They want me to say sorry, but I have nothing to apologize for. Madison was the one who left me. She thought she could control me by threatening, by calling police. I just showed her no one can control me." His calm tone, unwavering, chilled listeners. When the prosecution objected for exceeding scope, Judge Hayes allowed continuation, citing final self-defense right. Ethan smiled faintly, continued. Everyone in this room wants to think they're better than me. But the truth is no one here dares live truly. I just did what everyone thinks but doesn't dare. They're afraid. I'm not. The jury scribbled furiously. Many faces shocked. Madison's mother turned away, face in hands crying. Her father sat motionless, eyes fixed on the defendant, silent. Ethan seemed unconcerned, voice steady. I hear people say I'll spend life in prison, maybe, but this sentence changes nothing. I'm still me. My value isn't in the court's verdict, but in daring to do what I wanted. He paused, looking at the ceiling, as if reflecting. Others may call it crime, I call it choice. I'm not seeking forgiveness because I don't need it. The courtroom was dead silent. Even guarding officers exchanged glances, unbelieving. Ethan's voice wasn't loudly provocative, but the calm made every word terrifying. ADA Bennett stood, requesting brief cross-examination. She asked, Ethan, you say it was choice. Do you think taking another's life is a personal freedom? Ethan turned indifferent gaze. I think true freedom is doing what you want, regardless of others' thoughts. If they don't understand, that's their limit, not mine. A gasp from the back row. Someone whispered, insane. The judge gavels for order. Bennett stayed calm, asked, did you think of Madison, her family, societal consequences? Ethan shrugged. I'm not responsible for others' feelings. The short answer stunned the room. When prosecution finished, Ethan returned to the stand, adding a final sentence, if you want to punish me to feel better, go ahead. I don't need pity or disgust. I won't beg forgiveness because I feel no guilt. After that, Ethan returned to the defendant's seat, face calm, eyes to the ceiling. The jury looked at each other, many shaking heads, clearly impacted by the arrogant emptiness in his words. Judge Hayes signaled the clerk to enter the defendant's full statement into the record. The courtroom air thickened, no extraneous sound. ADA Bennett stood, addressing the judge briefly. Your Honor, the defendant's attitude and statement show contempt for law and humanity. We request this as an aggravating factor in sentencing. The judge nodded confirmation. When the gavel ended the day's session, everyone's final glance was at Ethan Cole, who had used his own words to etch the image of a smug, empty person scorning justice and human life. On the fifth day of the trial, Judge Robert Hayes announced reopening cross-examination between prosecution and defendant. The courtroom seemed quieter than ever. Light from windows cast on the bench, compressing the chilly atmosphere. Ethan Cole was asked to stand for final cross. Across the stand, ADA Olivia Bennett prepared a thick file, eyes focused, voice sharp. She opened briefly. Defendant, yesterday you said your act was free will. Today I want clarity. Do you believe murder is an expression of personal freedom? Ethan looked up, calm reply. I believe humans are born to choose. I chose. If someone calls it sin, that's their worldview, not mine. The jury noted, some frowning. Bennett stepped forward, tone unchanged. You say no regret, you knew consequences and didn't care. Do you understand that pulling the trigger killed a girl you once claimed to love? Ethan shrugged, eyes on the prosecutor. Love is emotion. Emotions change. I just did what felt right then. The short, cold answer silenced the room. Bennett didn't react immediately. She opened the file, pulled printed messages between Ethan and Madison, reading slowly. You're lying. You're not going anywhere. If you don't listen, I'll come find you. Ethan's message before the crime night. She looked up, eyes on defendant. Your words correct? Ethan nodded. Yes. But messages don't kill. Bennett replied instantly. No, but they prove intent. You couldn't accept rejection. You couldn't bear losing control. Ethan silent a second, then slowly. If someone challenges my limits, they accept consequences. In that moment, the courtroom was dead still. Olivia Bennett stared at Ethan, voice hardening. Your limits. Whose limits? Yours or the law's? Ethan replied, lower but clear. Laws are made by people to restrain others. I don't believe in them. Murmurs spread, forcing Judge Hayes to gavel for order. Bennett didn't back down. She displayed a crime scene photo on screen, Madison on the floor, phone still in hand. This is the consequence of your free will, she said, words emphasized. A unarmed girl, no defense chance. You call this choice? Ethan glanced at the photo, turned away casually. I don't deny it, but everyone dies eventually. The statement drew gasps, a few sobs. Bennett stayed calm, voice deepening, words firm. You didn't just kill, you stripped life's meaning. Ethan smiled vaguely. Maybe because I never saw that meaning to begin with. The jury exchanged tense glances. One noted quickly, another circled. Complete lack of empathy in their book. Olivia Bennett continued rebutting, using Ethan's initial interrogation statement. She read, I didn't think it was my business. His answer when asked why no police call. She looked up. You said this knowing the victim was dead. You deemed reporting unnecessary. Is this clear-minded or callous? Ethan looked, faint smile. Someone's dead. What's calling police for? I'm not into playing hero. Olivia Bennett breathed deeply, set the file down. Her voice no longer sharp, but calm and heavy. You're no hero, Ethan Cole. But today, you could prove you're at least human if you admit the truth. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed, slowly. The truth is, I have no regret. And that scares everyone, because they can't understand my freedom. The statement froze the courtroom air. The jury stopped noting. A few stared at Ethan, as if witnessing something beyond comprehension. Judge Hayes leaned back, face pensive. Olivia Bennett closed the file, stared at the defendant, voice decisive. No, Ethan. Freedom isn't taking others' lives. That's crime, and today, justice will remind you. Ethan shrugged, face nonchalant, soft reply. Whose justice, not mine? A wave of outrage rose in the gallery. The judge gavels repeatedly for order. The entire cross was recorded audio and video, with official court note. Defendant exhibits arrogant attitude, lack of remorse, tendency to challenge law, and disregard human life. When the judge ended arguments, no one in the room felt relief. The prosecution stood still, while Ethan returned to his seat, sitting like a victor. The silence enveloping the courtroom then wasn't justice as quiet, but that of people struggling to understand what makes a young person speak of their crime with such arrogance. On the morning of October 20th, 2009, the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas courtroom was packed with people. After more than 2 weeks of trial, the jury entered the final phase of deliberations. They left the closed meeting room at 10:20 a.m. after nearly 8 hours of continuous discussion overnight. Upon returning, their faces were solemn, eyes heavy, indicating a decision had been reached. Judge Robert Hayes asked everyone in the room to stand as the foreperson announced the court was back in session. The clerk read the relevant charges again, then the jury representative, a middle-aged woman, stood, holding a slightly trembling sheet of paper. She read loudly and clearly, the jury finds the defendant Ethan Cole guilty of first-degree murder, as defined by Ohio criminal law. The sound in the courtroom died down, leaving only the scratch of pens on files and heavy breathing from those seated behind. Mrs. Bennett bowed her head, hands clasped tightly, while across the aisle, Attorney Michael Crane sighed, eyes down. Madison's parents hugged each other tightly, tears falling endlessly. Behind them, friends and neighbors sobbed. A few softly clapped, not out of joy, but relief that justice had finally been served. Judge Hayes thanked the jury, asked them to sit, then turned to Ethan. Defendant Ethan Cole, he said slowly. Do you have anything to say before the court pronounces sentence? Ethan looked up, eyes still calm. He replied, nothing to say. I've said it all. His voice was even, emotionless, as if discussing something unrelated to himself. The judge was silent for seconds, then opened the thick file on the desk, his voice resounding in the quiet space. The court has considered all evidence, testimonies, and the defendant's attitude throughout the trial. This is a case with no provocation, no immediate violent conflict, It is a premeditated act, committed by someone fully aware of their consequences. He looked up, staring directly at the defendant. You said it was free will, but you forget that freedom does not exist without responsibility. You used freedom to kill a person, and for that, you will lose freedom forever. A long silence followed. Then the judge read the sentence aloud. For the crime of first-degree murder, the Franklin County Court sentences defendant Ethan Cole to life imprisonment without parole. The heavy wooden gavel sounded, echoing throughout the courtroom. Madison's mother burst into sobs, collapsing onto her husband's shoulder. Mr. Thomas Clark, her father, closed his eyes, hands gripping the chair tightly, silent tears rolling down. A few in the gallery let out small cheers, then fell silent immediately, yielding to solemn quiet. Judge Hayes continued the final remarks, voice low and decisive. The court has observed the defendant's attitude throughout the proceedings. Not a sign of remorse, not a hint of acknowledging wrongdoing. You smiled when the victim was mentioned, smiled at evidence against you, and called murder a choice. You killed not just with a bullet, but with absolute indifference to the value of life. He paused, eyes not leaving Ethan. You said justice isn't yours. You're right. Justice belongs to no individual. It belongs to all who still believe human life is sacred. And today, that justice is served. As the sentencing ended, Ethan sat still, no emotion. He looked down at the table, then tilted his head slightly, flashing a very faint smile, the smile everyone recognized. No one knew if it was defiance or just the reflex of someone who no longer cared. Reporters captured the moment, and the photo of Ethan smiling upon sentencing would later appear on the front pages of many newspapers. Ada Bennett stood, bowing in thanks to the court. When asked for comments after the session, she said briefly, "There is no victory in this case, only justice served." Attorney Crane placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder as police prepared to escort him out. He whispered something, but Ethan didn't respond. He simply stood, hands behind his back, walking calmly between two security officers. No bowing, no looking back. Below, the crowd stood in silence. A few nodded in agreement. The sentence was seen as fair, reflecting the obvious truth everyone had witnessed. As Ethan passed the row of Madison's family, Mrs. Clark turned away, unwilling to see the one who shattered her daughter's life. But Mr. Thomas Clark looked up, his gaze following the young man not with hatred, but with profound sadness for a young life that lost its soul before losing freedom. As the door behind the courtroom closed, light applause sounded then quickly faded. Judge Hayes gathered files, looked around the room, then said softly, almost only audible to those nearest, "The case ends. But what it leaves behind will never end." In that quiet space, no one said more. Only the sound of pens signing the verdict remained. The verdict ending one life and beginning a long chain of silence that would follow this city for years to come. The sentence for Ethan Cole closed, but its aftermath continued to envelop the city of Columbus for months afterward. Immediately after the trial, major newspapers across the state ran images of the defendant smiling upon sentencing, with bold headlines. "The smile of the unrepentant," media called it a symbolic case for the emotionally disconnected generation, where the line between humanity and apathy blurred. Many editorials deemed the verdict a triumph of justice, but also a moral tragedy, a tragedy of modern society, where indifference is sometimes disguised as personality and freedom. In the early days after the ruling, streams of people continued placing flowers in front of the Clark family home. The small house on Brookstone Drive became a temporary memorial, covered in white candles and handwritten cards. Madison's friends held a memorial at Northland High School, where she studied. During the event, the principal said briefly, "Madison left due to a senseless act, but her kindness and compassion will never fade." Many students cried. A month later, the Clark family announced the establishment of the Madison Clark Memorial Scholarship Fund to support underprivileged students pursuing education, Madison's unfulfilled dream. The announcement took place in the school's small auditorium, her parents standing together, voices choked but calm. Mr. Thomas Clark said, We cannot change the past, but we can help others have the future our daughter no longer has. The scholarship received widespread community support, with many organizations in and outside Ohio donating, seeing it as a way to turn tragedy into positivity. Meanwhile, national media continued exploiting the case, viewing it as a warning about emotional disconnection in youth. Outlets like the New York Times and Time magazine published in-depth articles analyzing emotional numbness in adolescence. A social psychologist was quoted, "Ethan Cole didn't kill out of hatred or power lust. He killed out of emptiness. And that's the most dangerous violence, the kind born from a soul's void." The quote spread widely, repeated in forums and school panels. Ohio education programs were updated, adding mental health and emotional control content to curricula. Parents began re-evaluating child-rearing, striving for connection over mere expectations. Meanwhile, Ethan Cole's name gradually faded from news, but lingered in small conversations as a symbol of a generation's slide without boundaries between individual and community. 3 months after the trial, Ethan was transferred from Franklin County Detention to Franklin Correctional Institution, a high-security facility for life-sentenced inmates. Warden records noted, "Stable behavior compliant with rules, no signs of violence or disorder." Periodic reports showed no notes of remorse or guilt. He spoke little, avoided group activities, spent most time reading and writing in a notebook. One supervisor described, "He's like someone without emotions. No sadness, no anger, no fear, just silence." Out there, the story of Ethan and Madison was still mentioned in sociology classes, criminal psychology lectures. Professors, journalists, and legal experts continued debating root causes. Had society overemphasized intellect while neglecting humanity? Or was it just an inexplicable personal choice? From any angle, the case remained a mirror reflecting a cold truth. Evil doesn't always come from anger, jealousy, or hatred. Sometimes, it arises from the indifferent void in the human soul, a void reason cannot fill. On the 1-year anniversary of Madison's death, her family held a small ceremony at Greenlawn Cemetery. February wind was biting, but hundreds came, bringing white roses and handwritten cards. Mrs. Linda Clark placed a hand on her daughter's gravestone, whispering, "I don't want you remembered for your death, but for how you lived." The words were quoted in the evening news, ending with on-screen text, "Evil needs no reason." And sometimes, the most terrifying thing isn't hatred, but the emptiness of conscience. Somewhere in Franklin Prison, Ethan Cole still lived, still silent, as if the story had ended. But beyond those cold concrete walls, the crime's echo persisted, not to remind of the perpetrator, but to remind people never to forget that indifference, if unrecognized and unchecked, can become evil's true form. The story of the Ethan Cole case is not just a personal tragedy between two young people, but also a reflection of a profound issue in today's American society, emotional disconnection and the crisis of humanity in the younger generation. Ethan didn't kill out of hatred or violent passion. He killed out of emptiness, out of the sense of power in controlling another. What makes this case haunting is not just the brutality, but Ethan's absolute calm, the cold demeanor in interrogation, the faint smile upon sentencing, and the words, "I have no regret," ringing like a declaration of apathy. These details are not alien to modern American life, where many teens grow up in emotionally disconnected environments, busy parents, social media replacing real interaction, success measured by grades or fame rather than kindness. Ethan's story is a wake-up call that intelligence cannot replace compassion, and that soul voids, if ignored, can turn into dangerous darkness. We can learn that education in the U.S. from family to school should not stop at knowledge and skills, but focus on emotional and moral education, teaching children to understand others' pain, take responsibility for actions, and most importantly, empathize. Because, as the story shows, evil sometimes comes not from hatred, but from indifference, the thing silently creeping into modern society if people forget how to feel and love. If you believe empathy can save a generation from apathy, subscribe to the channel to join us in exploring more stories that awaken conscience. Thank you for watching to the end. See you in the next video, where justice, humanity, and human darkness are illuminated once more.